It's always good. Yeah.
In fact, thank you for reminding me to.
Okay. Hey, this we're live streaming or whatever. Actually, careful. Share your most intimate.
So what you do, I don't know if you come in and do a talk. But my office.
I mean, no, I mean, I'm local, so it's not compliant, but we're actually here in LA. Yeah, we're right now. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, that's not too much. I wouldn't have a problem I have a whole lot of them.
Hey, Mark. Glad you could make it.
Yeah. Yeah. Did we move that before?
Okay. Welcome. So this is the UUAC. Where are you from? Okay. Cool. Oh, okay. So you know you. Oh, you're with us.
Yeah, how are you? Yeah.
Yeah, so, choice.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I have a lot of these types of one, you know, good. You look up, you not only should be getting good. The other ones, I'm a lot of big people who aren't getting good.
I made them blue creases. We're writing to that next year.
Are they like
I mean, it's a big-
days?
Yeah, just trying to decide strategically. Don't want to sit on the left. Right. Podium too high, too low. It's right there. It's in front of the podium. Easy. Is everybody here? Just not to be obvious.
What
do you got?
Huh?
What do you do?
What do you use primarily?
They're using Chef there. It's only been there about 2 months. So previously, last 2 countries they use puppets. So.
Right?
It's quite a little bit easier to understand one of the questions. But Chef is like it's more mobile. This one seems like I have a lot more experience with puppets, so yeah. So if I pick one out of the box, I pick that one. But I can definitely see that. It's a little more powerful. Really good product, very stable. The product,
Yeah, so I
it's also beautiful. They do this and dashboard's going to so just the way they use it. The language.
That's an elevator in your desk.
Yeah.
I think we went back up.
Yeah.
Hey, you gonna record too?
Yeah.
Yeah, you never know. Sometimes my network drops out. Huh? Yeah, I'm doing the Google Hangout on air from iPhone. Yeah, no, I try to do it every time.
Okay.
But it's if the wireless network craps out, it doesn't work.
All right. I'll have him back.
Good.
Carl.
Oh yeah, hey, my name's Jordan. Nice to meet you, Carl.
Yeah.
And the mic is live, so don't say anything.
Yeah, Jordan. That's why this is my new little hobby.
Oh, it's a good hobby.
Especially I'm always at SC every day.
Yeah, you know we got food and stuff too.
I forget that too. It's a long day today.
Wizard of Steve Nelson.
Then
DevOps, this and that.
So let's see.
Where are the possible buzzword is right now? I'll warn you.
Or whatever.
Yeah, that works. I'm always ready.
Yeah.
We're usually pretty good.
Yeah, I go to one of these
Well, I didn't know what he was going to get. So. I should have been clear about this. But I was just thinking the same thing. It's Mark. It's the market's too good. You know, it blows our meetup, our post meetup dinner. Yeah, you're getting beer.
Where is it? Where? So,
We are.
Okay, you got juice. Good. Because there's power over here too. You found your own.
Oh,
Oh, there's a floor mounted.
Make sure I get it.
Fix that. That's the question. Yeah.
Hours.
drive.
Hi, Carolyn. Nice to meet you. You working there?
Well,
So Lars not going to be here to keep me honest?
Huh? Lars?
I don't know if he,
I didn't check. He usually comes here. He was here last month, so. Well, you made it today. What program are you in?
this is our program over at SC.
Oh, cool. Okay, you're the R guy. Okay.
Well, this is our informatics, and there's analysis class over there at SC2.
Cool. That's all good. Big data is boom. Did you sign up for Big Data Camp? Okay, good.
A lot of people don't even know about the fact that they're oblivious of the fact that this big camp coming up, you know. But yeah, we have our visualization class.
Yeah, I just gotta keep an eye on the audio stream. Well, because it all comes. So with Google Hangouts, you schedule like account scheduling. You go into there. You go to Plus. You do Google Plus account. You go to plus.google.com/something/hangouts, and they can send you the link if you're really interested. And then you say, hey, start a hangout. It's scheduled for later. Okay, when you want to do it. So it's whatever Thursday, I think have it start at 6:30 and then have it run. Then, so it creates a YouTube link and a Google Hangout. So there's two parts. This is the Google Hangout meetup, but it's also whatever's here is getting streamed up to YouTube as well. And YouTube stays around. It's persistent.
Yeah.
And, you know, hundreds of thousands of people watch YouTube. And here, we have 8 people on the Google Hangout, but those 8 people, they can share their desktop, they can talk, like, you have remote presenters.
Yeah.
The presenter was in San Jose, shared his desktop.
A lot of it, hospital has the same thing. We have this educational network, and people can dial in.
Yeah. Google Hangout is great, but you have the 10 slots. So, and I test my monitor and stream with a laptop, but everything's being shot with that audio and the videos that I find. Yeah, no, because I can put it. I'm always do that. You know,
Like years ago, I had a new program.
and you got to record it. Like, so what are you going to record it to? Are you going to stream?
It's actually inside the program.
Okay.
You know, most artists do that was.
Because the other one, you have to say something.
Well, yeah, that was the most difficult part about finding out is I finally got online and I found somebody who makes a graphite, makes a carbon graphite pad, small pad, and if you look at that, it's called Blue Box. So I placed it on the back of my camera, on back of my phone, and it absorbs heat and it cools the phone and the battery down. And so I was surprised that
What is it called?
Pop, I guess it's called Pop.
But it's a graphite.
It's a carbon graphite. And I first, you know, was really skeptical because I had a lot of people that, not a lot of people, but I had one guy said, well, I put it on my battery and I couldn't take it off. I don't know if I put it on right. And I'm like, this is not a post. This is somebody to know what he's doing. So let me go see something. And lo and behold, I used to be funny, so I used to do my images. I used to do my video. The end of file would heat up and get so I have corrupted text.
And so that
You know what I did? I would take a full, you know what, those ice packs?
Yeah.
It worked before. It worked. And I would run one of my, I would run one of I was like, I'm going to find a way. I would run one of these along. And then it would sit with my camera up there, and it would sit with it, and it really actually worked. It actually worked, and that could be hot.
No, that might help. You know, I think I'm fortunate, but I had called for the camera.
Over an hour and a half is not too good. It's a long investment of keeping your phone running. Now, what I did is another thing. All the things, even the resist, the film that was in front of me, took that off too because I knew that was absorbing and trapping heat. So I had to remove all my safety devices, so I wouldn't carry the camera on my phone now more. You know, now I'm really, I have observed when I'm holding my camera, and I'm always, because I know now it can, and it's just an instant if I drop it.
Yeah, that was my problem last month. I wasn't monitoring the audio stream. I missed the first 10.
I saw you doing those little kids who were walking around. They're like, oh, yeah, you know, but I remember you guys got those.
No, I've only done this from here.
Oh, what? Last one?
Yeah. So I'm the host, so I do the intro. It's my YouTube account, Google account.
Okay.
Hey, Eric, I go to that's live, by the way. So. Good. Don't speak anyway. Going to Hollywood mode, only say good things.
I did because there maybe sometime in my life I'm going.
Yeah. Well, you never know.
Yeah,
You never know when you're running into. Yep.
There was
I
a,
remember him now.
there was a movie with Robin Williams where they had like chips in people's heads when they were very young, and they recorded their entire life, and then when they died, they had these people like taking that chip outside of their head and then edit their life so that they could play this movie to their glory or whatever. And it turned out that in that universe, the people that were doing the editing were not allowed to have chips. The character that Robin Williams plays was adopted, and he had the chip, he just didn't know about it. And there's this whole thing about like some bad guy gets, he edits some bad people
Yeah. Oh no, it's too good.
No, definitely not me.
Like today,
Oh, she thinks I'm not.
or not heads, or just not hands.
I decided I want.
What's the deal?
It's really good.
Everybody's going
Very
everywhere.
moist. I love it too.
I'm saying, I have a teacher over at SC and and when I go, Malcolm,
Hey, good.
so and so I said, but there's a spring. As well as your voice, and they're telling you if you were sad or if you had any medical business. I'll show you.
That's it.
And you know what?
Unless you just look at it,
You don't think.
it's They're autonomous, but yeah,
I'm
they're
just
just
gonna
like
keep
commercially
sending you around I'll even
driven from outside.
snapshot.
One of the guys in our love group, I should have texted him at the beginning of the
A lot of people expected to have like highly, low
Talked about
latency, high
Facebook and how they
bandwidth
use
kind
chefs.
of,
He gave us some
communication
interesting
with
things.
between it's great.
Yeah, we talked about chef and
And it
relationship.
turns out that a lot of people had systems
Yeah,
that
they're-
really did well, and also and some of
What
them
is
just
the,
couldn't. When you look at the results, it's
other
like the
thing
three
is like
teams
chef,
that
like,
effectively made it to the end, even if they fail a couple of times, they were like, I don't think anyone wants to change it. The thing is, ultimately, the teams that made it the furthest are all the teams that effectively had
That's new.
business included with, you know, wireless problems, and we get communication, you know, high latency, rapid right? And then the way Dogwood presented it at the beginning, when they started doing the testing was, oh, by the way, this is Fukushima, you know, radioactive.
I'm a beginner, yeah, chef learned to
Wi-Fi, or your
program, et cetera, yeah. But
So
I realized having old where I was not able to follow these classes or do some, you suggest in a laptop.
I understand what they, they're not.
I can go to school and.
Oh, maybe the EMP pulse. Oh, surprise. But,
Oh, especially if you're, I never. I don't see that. And that's where I.
But yeah, that's an idea. You can see that process.
Yeah.
I don't mean they wear out.
I put that into.
They can't take the newest system.
Yeah.
Trying to accommodate autonomous objects.
What do you do?
So, I'm involved in like creative. Yeah, we're trying to find out what their data are.
We always know it as it's.
See how I can.
Well, the good thing is, we sort of, this is bad, and we sort of to back the program. We sort of figured out, oh, this is your test series. It means that you're going to go and remember that, and everything you're on, what the distribution is.
I'd really rather have.
Right now, we would use like
The train, like
That's exactly what. I never could do that. Program.
Effectively
Hands off. I know how to do it. I just know how to do it.
Malware that's not quite sentient, but it's pretty advanced at this point. It's not really created, it's just sort of like if all does nothing. As a digital life form. And the thing is, in that environment, there's systems to do things like manage the vents inside subway stations. And one of the things they figured out was, well, we're just going to put the brain in there under control, but show it when it needs to, like, show it that when people show up, air needs to be on, and then train those raptor devices things to do this, right? And then at the end, they're just like, okay, well, of course, when people show up, air is turned on, so great, fantastic, let's ship this. And it turns out that someone the train ends up being late by 1 minute or 2 minutes or something. Again, the train pulls up, people come out, and there's no air. And it turns out that the brain instead of training on what was obvious was the people walking, outside the train. What it was seeing as the token that tells it if it's, good or bad was the clock. There was a clock in the, in the field of vision of the camera that was monitoring this thing. And when it saw the clock move, it happened to be just the time it hit the train coming in. Right? And there was, instead of going, oh, there's people that need air, it was, oh, the hand of the clock moved. so it needs to be on. And there's something with the clock, like either the clock doesn't work or the train isn't able to leave. And then all these people are showing up on this thing, and it's like a massive disaster.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But it's a very interesting book, and that whole like digital aspect of that.
You know, rely on these digital systems. You know, there was some guy that said the other day, says, well, what if ISIS takes out our power grid?
And so if you're going to,
up here, they say if they did, they literally put us back in the ice age. I mean, literally back in the stone age.
I don't know if they do that far back, but it's not like with screw with people.
But what he's talking about is that they were asked, some guy was trying to ask, not scare people, but give people if it does happen, it'll take months for us to recover.
Yeah, I was I mean, just in terms of like reorganizing people, like you can pick up your phone and go, hey, you guys.
If your phone was on and there was an EMP pulse, it'd be on. You never use it. There's other things that would be saved in a Faraday cage would be useful. Harvest operations. So it's like
It's no longer a question of if, it's a question of when.
They're mentioning about the alcohol. Of not having electronics in their lifestyle. They still would be. So they're trying to show you that they have a way in life that we can stop for a moment and move on. You know, if things ever collapse, we could go, you know, at least we'll fall back.
Humanity as a whole.
Oh, man,
Oh, well. No, we've had that actually.
Oh, you see, we live here, you know, close to each other. You don't even have to neighbor. All you know is that you see in the morning, right away. You don't live in the but it's not.
That's cool.
You want me to stay?
Yeah, no, I had a freaking technical difficulty. Well, the problem is the power went out on my main laptop, and I brought my backup up, but the fucking I can't initiate a hangout from the phone, but I need the phone in to do the streaming.
I will get back
So I guess the other thing is I can record from one of these laptops. Let me see what happens.
Yeah, just let me know. I'll stay out of your hair.
Yeah, give me a minute. The same one. Dude, don't nag me. Enjoy the food. Just plan B this shit. Is it? Are you? Can you see the screen? No. That's the problem. The phone died. So.
Plan B.
Plan B. Yeah. Huh? Yeah. I have a that's not the problem. This wasn't plugged in. It's a long story. I'll spare you the details. No. I think we're good.
Oh, okay. No colors are. I know what tuna is. I've been trying to tell. That's why we yeah, I like this stuff called tuna when I was in Hawaii. We have a client that's like that. So I went to Mexico, and then I found out it was pretty crap.
Hey, Ned, can you check this? This is backwards, right? Is that?
No.
Okay, so that's
I mean,
good.
it's forward.
Okay, good. All right. All right, let's roll with this. Actually, let's see. It's hit the. Bring down.
And now
I'm not totally.
I was talking to someone the other day that's
Dependent independent variables.
All right, let's get started. Pardon the late start. Welcome to the Unix User Association of Southern California June 2015 meetup. Ned Harris from Chef will be talking about the Chef SDK in a couple of minutes. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about UUASC, and Carolyn, our host here at Q, can give us a little mention about Q. So, a Unix User Association, we meet once a month in Los Angeles area, usually here. We try to meet on the first Thursday of the month. This second Thursday of the month is always a good fallback. Main thing about being a member is being a member of our mailing list. Is there anybody here who's not on our mailing list at UUASC.org? Okay, cool. Well, good. You're all here. Anybody out in video land, if you go to UUASC.org, we have 3 mailing lists. The general mailing list for all the great discussion, for just announcements of presentations and other good stuff. And then a mailing list called UUASC Jobs, which is for job posting or if you're available for work for Unix or Linux related jobs in Southern California. So in other stuff, like I said, we meet the first Thursday of the month. I'm always looking for presenters, and that can be on any topic with a Unix or a Linux related tangent to it. We've had presentations on 3D printing, embedded systems, programming topics, what have you.
Proposition 13?
No, yeah.
And you forgot to mention Bitcoin.
And Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, hot stuff. And actually, if somebody wants to do a talk on alternate uses of the blockchain, I've been trying to look for somebody to do that. So contact me here if you're here or I'm on the mailing list, or you email leaders@uuasc.org. We'd love to have you come and present here. So we're hosted here at Q. Carolyn is just going to come up and tell us a little bit about Q and all the nice things they do for us.
So I'm Carolyn, for anyone that doesn't know me, although I think I know most of you. So I work here at Q. We are an IT and digital staffing firm. So that means we help find jobs for anybody working in the tech field, all the way from software developers, help desk, system administrators, QA, project managers, CTOs, you name it. So if you or anyone you know are looking for work or looking to hire people, please come to us and let us know. We're happy to help out. Also happy to help out with other resources like just, questions on the job market or resume help, anything like that. Always happy to help. Right now I do have a ton of Linux related jobs. So
Yay!
So really fast, I have a Linux and network engineer position in Santa Monica, senior DevOps roles, junior DevOps roles all over the place, DevOps supervisor role out in Glendale, senior Linux role right over here, Playa Vista. So any of those sound interesting, or anyone that's looking, we have a referral program. So I'll be in the back all night. If you need anything, please feel free to come and talk to me. Other than that, the bathrooms are kind of around the corner, like just keep going around it's like a circle. And please recycle. These ones are trash. These ones are recycled. Thank you. Enjoy.
Okay, hey, thank you. Once again, another round of applause for Carolyn and the good folks at Q. Also, after the presentation, you're welcome to join us. We're going to go across the street, have some more drinks and some food. And I think that's, does anybody, Kevin, did anybody have any other meetups that they wanted to plug? I know Kevin from LA.
I have a Linux LA meetup, and we're meeting.
Oh, yeah, right. Linux LA is meeting here.
On Tuesday, it's going to be on Git.
Right.
So it's meetup.com/LinuxLA.
Get your Git on to here 2 weeks from today. Yeah, and so LA AWS shall have something.
Nothing announced at the moment, so yeah.
Yeah, and I know OpenStack LA is meeting June 25th as well, but that's in Pasadena. Yuck. Okay, also the SCALE, Southern California Linux Expo, they just announced the call for papers. So call for papers is due in October. The presentation, the conference is going to be in Pasadena this year, sometime in February. It's a nice lost weekend for geeks. And we've had many presenters, people that have presented to UUAC and made it to the big leagues over at SCALE and even on to OSCON. So if you're thinking about pitching something for SCALE, you could hone your talk here. So once again, let me know. So with no further ado, we've covered a lot. We've covered the big 3-4 configuration management tools in the past, and now we have Ned Harris from Chef to talk to us about the Chef SDK. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. So we have, we did lose a little bit of time, so I want to kind of get a gauge for where everyone's at. How many people here are already familiar with Chef or feel like they kind of have all the basics kind of figured out? How many people are like, I have no clue about Chef and I'm here to kind of learn some of the basics? Okay, so we're going to be discussing the Chef DK, but I kind of assumed that there was going to be a lot of people who may not have like the basic foundation of Chef, so I did kind of put in to this talk a quick introduction, and it sounds like it's probably worthwhile to go over that. We'll kind of get through it pretty fast. Wow, I just lost my whole slide. That's great. Interesting. I hope that doesn't happen very often. All right, so my name is Ned Harris. I'm a solution architect at Chef. You have my Twitter handle here, my email, LinkedIn. I will provide at the end of this where you can get this deck, so don't freak out if you feel like you need to take screenshots. I'll actually provide the deck for you.
Yeah, and you joined the meetup. So, right,
yeah.
You could even, people could communicate through there.
Perfect.
And if you could post a link to your slides there, that would be
even better. So the agenda, like I said, I was kind of prepared if we needed to do a quick introduction to Chef. I think we'll blow through that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to explore the Chef DK, the Chef Development Kit, which is kind of becoming the, what's happening at Chef is we've discovered kind of patterns, with a lot of the customers we're working with. And a lot of you might have heard we have a product called Delivery, where we've kind of encapsulated this whole kind of continuous delivery pattern. And for the first time, we've actually done something where we've never really done very often, which is we got a kind of prescribed thing. that we're telling people, like, this is the way to do it, this is the way to be successful. All roads, whether you're doing delivery or whether you're doing your own thing with Chef, all kind of start with the Chef DK. It's kind of like base camp, so I thought it was kind of a fitting place to start. And then after we get through this, I want to actually just build some infrastructure with you. You know, enough talk, let's actually just see it hands-on. I don't have a pre-built demo. We're literally just going to build this thing from thin air. And then hopefully there'll be enough time for Q&A, but we'll see. You know, we'll see how fast we get through this. And if Q&A gets short, I'm going to go hang out and have drinks. So come meet me, and I will answer any and all questions that you guys have. So quick introduction to Chef. Again, I put this disclaimer up here. Chef is a pretty large tool set, and there's no way that I'm going to kind of get you everything you need to know about Chef in one sitting. We do have like a 2-day workshop where it's 2 full days for fundamentals, another 2 days for intermediate, where you get like that thorough thing. So we're going to kind of just brush the surface, but hopefully we'll get you kind of at least started, like a jump start, so you kind of know where to go and know how to ask the right questions. So why would I want to use Chef, right? Well, the first part is that infrastructure is complicated. Anyone who tells you differently is probably selling you something. And rather than sit there and say like, well, you know, infrastructure is complicated, you know, how do I deal with this? You know, Chef basically does a good job of managing that complexity. This kind of brought me up when I was kind of putting this deck together, and I kind of had this analogy that came to my mind. I used to, as a teenager, I used to practice a lot of martial arts, and I studied this one martial art called Kuk So Won. Maybe somebody's heard of it. It's a Korean style. And what it did is it mixed together a bunch of different Korean martial arts into one, and had this kind of concept of hard styles and soft styles. And what I kind of realized when I started thinking about complexity and the things we deal with is when people come up with solutions to deal with this complexity, you usually fall in one of these 2 kind of categories. You either have this hard style, which is we're making everything simple, you know, and then you have the soft style, which is kind of this idea of like you just accept the complexity and learn to manage it. And that's kind of the difference between when someone comes and is throwing punches at you, it's, you know, block and counter, versus just taking their momentum and using that to your advantage. And I think in an analogous sort of way, that's what Chef tries to do. So how do we all have in the past have managed complexity? Well, back in the old days, right? And maybe some of us, it's not so old days, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it was today.
Yeah, you know, we're just going to SSH into the box and just start typing away, right? I mean, that's an option. You know, you might have some scale issues when you start getting, you know, 2,500 servers, right? I am old enough to remember this little trick, right? Where we keep notes in a little server.txt file for the night shift guy to see what, you know, I was doing during the day. Problem is with that is like at 2 a.m., you know, when you have like a crit sit in a situation, the last thing you're thinking about is, oh, I'm going to update that server.txt before I go home and crash, right? Wikis. We've kind of worked with wikis a lot in the past, at least I have. And wikis are like boats, and I always make the favorite boat joke. It's like a boat, the 2 best times with boat ownership is the day you buy it and the day you sell it. Everyone gets excited when you bring up a new wiki. You know, everyone has the best intentions. We're going to start keeping this thing up. It's going to have everything in there. Hell, we'll even create a little automated thing, so automatically update it. You get all these nice things. And then it becomes this kind of, you know, obituary to the way your infrastructure used to look like. You know, back in the day, it used to work before it, you know, stopped working, right? Yeah, they're just really hard to maintain. And they ultimately, I found, just fail at that. So now we're getting a little closer to home. You know, people are probably used to doing custom scripts, you know, just working on your bash, your shell scripts, all that. That's not bad, but the problem is when you get like a bunch of servers, you're going to have different versions of these scripts. You have different people. And when, you know, Bob, who wrote all the scripts, wins the lottery or gets a new job, and you're sitting there trying to scratch your head at how and what he was thinking when he did it, you know, that becomes kind of problematic. And that finally brings us to what I kind of consider the modern age, where a lot of us have found ourselves with this concept of golden images. So golden images have become really prevalent because of the cloud, because of virtualization technologies. Problem is gold's really heavy. When you put all your configuration into this one image, right, you know, it takes a lot of work to change that. And I'll give you an example. So you take this typical infrastructure, you have your Nagios, your graphite, application layer, your data layer. Imagine you get this mandate that says we're going to move all SSH ports off 22 and let's put it on 2022. Okay, no problem. We have our golden images. So I count like 6 golden images that we're going to have to, kind of off to the side. We're going to go download them, open them up, change the configs, recapture them. Now we got 12 of these images that we have to go redeploy, right? And a lot of times, I don't say this, in this slide it says typically manually. I know there's a lot of ways to do this where it's not manually, but it's still a pain, right? And of course you don't want to break anything, that gets a little ugly. But here's the main problem. All your configs are invalid because you've hard-coded all this information into this golden image. And that's a problem. You end up coming up with all these alternative solutions to not just deploy your golden image, but then to configure them. And what is that typically? Custom scripts, maybe? So you're kind of back to where you started. So here's an idea. And this is kind of what we're starting to push these days, is this concept of policy-driven configuration management. And this is basically where Chef comes in. So Chef's basically an automation framework. And the way it works is we're going to turn your infrastructure into code. Now that it's code, it's just like any other code base. You can version control it. You can do things like test-driven development against it. You can distribute it. It's flexible. You're going to actually define declarative definitions of how the desired state of your infrastructure should be. And then Chef's going to go ahead and test and repair and make sure that that state is always maintained. It's worth noting that Chef's API driven, and of course it supports just about any operating system you could throw at it. I'm sure somebody in this room could probably find some obscure thing, but all the major things are supported. From AIX to most of the Unix variants, etc. So just a quick rundown on the Chef platform. At the bottom here, we have the Chef development kit. That's what we're going to actually be talking about today. This is where you're going to author your cookbooks and your policy. We have tools that support this concept of test-driven infrastructure, which is basically test-driven development for your infrastructure. This is typically installed on like a laptop or workstation, so you get kind of all the tools you need to do this. Once you build enough confidence by testing it and making sure that it's doing exactly what you expect, you can upload it to the Chef server, where it's going to store that policy and actually associate that policy to a given node. And these nodes are represented in the Chef server, but in reality they exist inside your cloud, inside your virtual infrastructure, hell, even in your bare metal. It really doesn't matter. Up top, we have kind of the only things that really cost money, which is this analytics platform. We have a high availability and replication, and we have this kind of fancy GUI management console. So with the exception of that, these 3 little squares on top, everything else is free. It's open source. You just use it. And you can tell I'm going really fast. So if you guys have any questions as I go, I'm just thinking about time, but I don't want to go so fast as to blow past you. So definitely stop me, raise your hand, call me out if you do have questions as we go. Just want to make sure we're clear about that. So the basic building blocks of Chef, at the basic thing, we have resources. You take one or more resources, you put them into recipes. You take one or more recipes, put them into cookbooks. So building blocks. So what is a resource at the end of the day? Well, it's just a system state that you're going to define. So this package Apache, that's a resource. That's basically all there is to it. This is just saying that I expect Apache to be installed. So, and the way these resources work is, I mentioned this earlier, is they work on a kind of a test and repair model. So if you have this, package Vim as an example, it's going to test, is Vim installed, And if the answer is yes, it's going to say I'm done. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to mess with anything. However, if the answer is no, I'm going to repair it by installing it, So this loop is what creates kind of a stability so that you can start introducing change, introducing policy while the system remains stable, And it also creates this concept. I'm supposed to stop using this word because these mathematicians call you out saying you're not using the word properly, but you hear this word called idempotency a lot in regards to Chef, and it simply means that you can just run this thing like 400 times, and you're going to get the same result. You're not going to, add up a bunch of junk by just repeatedly running this command. So again, resources are going to use a test and repair model. I kind of already said this in other words. If it's basically already the state you want it, it leaves it alone. If not, it fixes it. So moving on our building blocks, let's break up recipes. And what are recipes? Well, they're just a collection of resources, and they're executed in the order that they're listed. So this is an example of a recipe. You have a package resource that we already got familiar with. Below that, you have a template resource. So this template resource is just going to declare that I want a configuration file to exist that has the contents of this source that I've created called HTTP proxy config ERB, and we'll talk about templates in a little bit later. And then you have a service resource that just says, I want to make sure that HA proxy service is always running, and it'll even go so far as to say enable and start, saying that basically like your check config, I just want to make sure that it's running, even on a restart. So these three resources put together add up a little more than the sum of their parts is a working HA proxy server. And the thing to keep in mind, and the thing I kind of tell people is to think about it as Lego blocks. The resources are just the blocks. You put them together, and if you put enough of them together, you can make something complicated, but from basic parts that you can wrap your head around. Enough Lego blocks get put together, and you have this like Millennium Falcon spaceship, that you see at Legoland, right? So again, order matters. I'd like to reiterate this because sometimes people get a little hung up on this. If you put a package at the bottom and service at the top, you're going to have a problem because it's trying to start a service that may not be installed yet. So that brings us to cookbooks. And think of cookbooks as your artifact. Again, this is infrastructure as code. So your cookbooks are the thing that you're going to distribute, the thing you're going to version, the thing you're going to put into version control. They definitely have a collection of all the recipes that you created, but they also have other things like policy. We kind of mentioned the template resource. Well, this is where you would actually store that template file, So this collects all your stuff. Now, they typically map one-to-one to a piece of software. So you have something like a MySQL cookbook or an Apache cookbook. So all this wouldn't really work really well unless we had a way of actually taking this code and doing something with it. And that's where the Chef client comes in. So the Chef client is the executable that's going to perform all these actions and process that code and actually do that test and repair against your node. It typically runs in like a daemon mode, so like on a kind of regular basis, maybe 30 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever your organization needs. And by the way, it's included with the Chef DK, and you'll hear that statement a lot because just about everything's included with the Chef DK these days. So in the real world, it works something like this. You'd have this node that'd be sitting out there with the Chef client running. It would check in periodically to the Chef server and say, hey, what policy should I follow? The Chef server maintains a run list for that node object and says, here's your policy, go test and repair. If everything is already fine, like the last time I checked in, nothing's happened in the last 15 minutes, it's just going to go through and say everything's up to date, no problem. But if you've introduced any policy in the last 15 minutes, it's going to repair that and introduce that policy. So this gives you this ability to, in a very safe way, introduce new policy and new configuration changes to your environment without creating a lot of chaos. And again, 15 minutes later, rinse and repeat. So the Chef client runs in two modes. It will run in conjunction with the Chef server, which is kind of the default behavior, but it's also going to run in local mode. It can also run in local mode, which we also call Chef Zero, for some of you who may have heard that. So that's basically another word for Chef in local mode. Another thing worth mentioning, when the Chef client runs, it collects a whole bunch of information, a whole bunch of data about the node that it's running against. And it's this tool called OHI that gathers all this metadata. Things like IP addresses, host names, the platform that's running on. All this data is collected, and it gives you the ability to access this data, this dynamic data, and do really dynamic things with it. So we have that situation, where we're looking at this node virtualization system. This would tell something like where you can use in your recipe the actual virtual platform that this thing's running on. So if you have something unique in your recipe that you only want to do to something that's running on VMware, this is how you can find out if your node's running on VMware and make a dynamic decision in your code to react to that. You also have the ability, using a tool called Search, to search the whole Chef server for nodes with certain patterns. So you could find this where you're saying, I want to populate this variable with a list of every node that is running CentOS. And you could get to that information right away and use that. And that's cool because when you have this, like we were talking about before, and you add something like this, it allows you to make all this happen automatically. And I think that's really the real power of Chef and configuration management is, you know, the ability to do this. If this was manually, I think you could count 12 plus resource changes just for adding one node to this topography. And that would be a pain. So that's my quick down and dirty intro to Chef. It's filled with lots of holes, but I wanted to at least get a baseline. Do we have any questions or thoughts? This is the time before we move on to Chef DK.
Good.
Okay, you first.
So you mentioned the Chef server and then the OHI. Are there other components that are required for running?
Well, there's a lot going on, but I mean, it's not like you're installing OHI.
Sure.
That just comes with the Chef server. So are you just asking what other things are going under the hood?
Yeah. So like from an infrastructure standpoint, like what are all the components I need to make to get to that state?
Yeah. Well, first off, like I said, this is just comes batteries included with Chef, but you have the thing like solar is part of Chef. So Chef uses solar a lot. That's kind of the 1-2 punch between all the data gathered with OHI and the ability to kind of index it and search it with solar. I mean, without going through the whole laundry list of everything Chef does, I mean, I think those are the two pertinent things with.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Okay.
I had a basic question. Does the changes or the way the changes get propagated, is it the client pulling a change down, or does the server push the change out?
That's a great question. In Chef works on a pull model. So everything, the majority of work's happening on the edge on the Chef client. So the Chef client is going and tapping into the Chef server and saying, what's my policy? And then the Chef client's doing all the work of testing and repairing and changing all, the things that need to be tested and repaired. So it leaves the Chef server very light and nimble. I'm actually allowed to talk about this now publicly. I wasn't sure for a long time, but Yahoo is one of our customers, and they're actually running 130,000 nodes on one Chef server, which is a pretty remarkable scale considering, that's a lot of nodes, and it's all based on that architecture. Because everything's happening at the edge, it doesn't mean that Chef server is going to, burn up and die.
Well, and you guys also rewrote your. Didn't the Chef server get a major rewrite?
Yeah. So we're now, a lot of the internals are built on Erlang, which we found a big performance increase when we moved from, I think everything was in Ruby at one point. Now a lot of the internals of the Chef server is based off of Erlang, which really gave it a performance boost. So you had a question. Sorry.
Yeah, you mentioned that guy on the other shift that takes over when you have passed up, and he's got to know what you're doing. And I noticed that you haven't left any room in here about comments. And that's something that I'll always try to beat into my coders. Put some comments on there so that the next guy isn't going to go crazy trying to figure out what you're doing. Now, most of the time he can take a look at it and he knows what you're doing. But there are times when you think a little different from the way this other guy thinks. And you should put the damn comments on.
You, sir, are 100% correct. And, I apologize. In our demo here, we didn't put the comments, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. In practice, this is code. You should be commenting the crap out of it, letting everyone know, what you're thinking and what you're doing in it. So I could not agree with you more. I mean, the presentation doesn't have it, but I definitely practice that in real life, and I would encourage that too.
You're a good boy.
I Anyone else? Yes.
Touching on that, is there a reason why you mentioned wikis and sort of suggested task management? Is there functionality there that's supposed to replace a wiki?
I guess what I was just saying is that, when we're trying to manage our complexity, oftentimes we're leaning on wikis as our ultimate tool.
Right.
and just showing where that fails.
You're saying to document the uses and purpose of each.
Yeah.
code.
Well, the wiki,
Documented in code rather than documented. in
Yeah, I
code.
mean, code in a way is living documentation, if done right. I mean, that's the thing, and it's the documentation that's literally affecting your change. So it's kind of documentation in real time. At the end of the day, you mix that with version control, something we'll talk about in a second, and collaboration, and you have probably a much better, healthier communication channel.
the other thing is the wiki could have been like an impromptu code repository too. Like you're cutting out little bits and then spitting them onto the command line.
Yeah.
So it was more than just documentation. But I guess going forward, does Chef handle documentation specifically, or is it assumed the wiki's still going to be around? You're just not going to be running in code.
Chef indirectly or even directly, I guess it depending on how you look at it, handles a lot of the documentation. I mean, you have the documentation in code. I'm going to show you in a second as we move to the Chef DK. When we build a repo, we're building markup like MD files as we build that repo that go into your version control that supply a lot of that documentation. You had a question in the back.
Oh, no, I was just going to comment on the gentleman who was talking about coding standards and putting documentation in code. To your point about the code being living documentation is only true if you read through every freaking line of the recipe.
Yeah.
As the gentleman pointed out, if you have blocks that indicate your intention, then that makes the readability so much more valuable. Because then I know I can skip over areas that hadn't been changed or, weren't within the architectural model that I saw break in my infrastructure.
Yeah, and I'm tempted to start following up more on that, but I think I'm going to move on because I want to get through this before we get cut off. But yes, I totally agree, and I'm captivated enough where I want to talk more about it, but I have to use discipline.
Or we can take it up across.
Yeah,
the
well, definitely. I'm going to be out. I'm going to be having a beer with you guys later too. So definitely let's keep our questions in mind. I'll be here to answer them. So we're talking about the Chef DK, and I kind of mentioned how this is kind of the development side, the thing you're going to be kind of setting up on your local workstation or your laptop. And it's only fair, I want to mention some of the other tools that I'm using in conjunction with the Chef DK, because the Chef DK is going to give you the majority of what we're doing, but there are some other tools and they're worth mentioning. So obviously we have the Chef DK. What is the Chef DK? Well, it's kind of an all-in-one installer where we've taken these kind of best-in-class open source tools that people from the chef community have been using, in some cases for years, and put them into one single easy-to-install package that you can just get up and running right away. We're giving you your own embedded version of Ruby, and we're isolating it. So if you're a Ruby developer and you want to use Chef, you don't have to worry about all that cross-pollination crap that is a pain. We literally give you a command where you can do Chef gem install instead of just gem install, and it will put it into your Chef space rather than your open Ruby space. We're giving things like I mentioned before, like Test Kitchen for our testing frameworks, Workshelf for dependency management. Lots and lots of tools. We're going to go over a lot of them today. Here's again that list. Things like Rubicop and Food Critic are your code linting tools. Chef Spec for in-memory unit testing. The Chef bin is a very thing. I'm amazed at how many people don't actually know about the Chef bin command, and people are doing this the hard way. I'm going to be doing a demonstration that I think will change your thoughts on Chef bin if you weren't using it already. So on top of that, I'm using Git. So everyone, just out of curiosity, how many people, when they do version control to them, that means like doing a something dot back, or like a date dot back. Okay, that's not version control. I'm not, I don't want to, harp on anyone, but you should be using real version control. I'm just using Git. I'm not saying you have to use Git, but Git's what I'm using. I had to pick one. That's what I'm using. But some form of real version control is important.
And if you want to learn to use Git, come back here in 2 weeks for the Git
There you go.
UUASC-LA.
So, question on that, because you can use pretty much any SCM you like.
Yeah.
I've used Perforce, I've used them all. But DK, when you try and create a new Chef repo, and then you try and do a cookbook upload, it tells you that you haven't checked it into Git. How do you switch that off if you're using something other than Git?
I don't actually. That's a really good question of how to switch that off. I can find that out
for you. I don't have the answer
By
right here.
default, it moans, hey, you
Yeah.
haven't git check in.
Yeah, I will tell you right off the bat that Chef has a bias towards Git, and we're not ashamed of it. We're pretty open. Matter of fact, our whole delivery product has kind of been built around Git. So with that said, we don't discriminate you to the point where you can't use other things, but most of the things we kind of lean you towards Git. So we're also using VirtualBox in this case. The main appealing thing about VirtualBox is it's free. That's what I like about it. And that's, by the way, that's our desktop virtualization. Just I didn't mention that, but it says there. And we're using Vagrant. So in case you don't know, Vagrant's a tool for building pretty much your complete development environments, and it's kind of has a focus on automation. So it's kind of an abstraction to your desktop virtualization that's going to help automate a lot of stuff, and it works really good in conjunction with Test Kitchen, which we're going to be looking at soon. I'm using Sublime Text. The main thing I like about Sublime Text is the Chef plugin. The Chef plugin is awesome, and you're going to see why I can do this demo so slick, because I have tab completion, and I use it to great effect. So let's get started and actually stand up a little bit of infrastructure. So I'm going to walk over here because I didn't know how the setup would be, so hopefully I don't knock anything. All right, good so far. So for starters, this is how raw and unscripted this is. I'm going to create like a brand new repo that we'll all be able to kind of get access to afterwards, which should be fun. So we'll just call it what? Chef. I think I even tested this, so I already have the meet up there. So create the repository. All right. So let's get this thing up. Everyone see that all right? So I'm in my demos directory, so I'm just going to do a quick clone. So of course it's warned me that I've just basically cloned an empty repository, right? And kind of expected that. So what we're going to do is, first off, I'll just say that I have, just to show you this, that I have the Chef DK running. I'm writing right now 0.5.1. I don't think that's the latest because they create these updates pretty rapidly these days, but it is pretty close to the latest. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a chef command. So I'm going to use a chef generate. This is that chef executable I was mentioning. If I do a chef-help, you'll see some of the things that I can generate. I can generate apps, cookbooks, recipes, repos. So what I'm concerned with here is we want to populate this empty repo, right? So I'm just going to do a chef generate repo. Oops, before I do that, I'm going to cd into the meetup that we're in. So chef, sorry, it's hard to type from this angle, but repo. And I'm just going to put a dot to say, name it after the directory that I'm in. And you see, it just generated a bunch of stuff. And so if I look here, you can see it's already kind of created a scaffolding for my repo. So really all I need to do at this point is just do my git add and my git commit. And my git push. And so here we are back at our repo, and if I hit this, you can see that this has done a lot of work for us. And going back to the documentation, it even supplied a basic MD file that gives you a lot of instructions for new people about next steps and where to go. So this README file is just part of the thing that was generated, and obviously most people replace it, with their own documentation, but it's nice to know it's there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up Sublime and take a quick, deeper look at things. So what did we generate just from that one command? Well, we generated scaffolding, so we have our cookbooks. It actually gives an example. We have things like our data bags and roles. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create a cookbook. Yeah. So I'm in the cookbooks directory.
And I'm just going to do a chef generate cookbook. And we'll just call this cookbook Apache. We'll just make it a little Apache server. So you see what we've done here, just by doing that, now we have this Apache cookbook with all the scaffolding for a cookbook available. This saves a lot of time. I don't know if anyone who's been using Chef in the past has been kind of doing this thing where you go and you clone a repo to get all this stuff. Is one way people have been doing it. God forbid if you do all this manually, that would not be fun.
So did the Chef binary pretty much replace Knife?
It's overlapping Knife. There's still a lot of useful things with Knife, but in the end of the day, Knife is infrastructure as command line. And what we're starting to do with the Chef DK is we're starting to introduce things like Chef provisioning and other things that's truly infrastructure as code. But and definitely can talk about that. So the thing I want to kind of move on to at this point, before we go any further. What's that?
I said color coded.
Yes, is this idea about test-driven development in regard to our infrastructure. So I'm actually going to go back to the deck for a second. And let's talk about Test Kitchen. And maybe I'll slide over here because we'll do a little bit of talking before I. So Test Kitchen is our kind of test harness suite. It's going to give us the ability to execute code on one or more platforms. It uses a driver plugin architecture. So we're using kind of Vagrant stuff now, but there's no reason you can't use EC2. I pointed at him because he runs EC2 meetups. It's only natural. I'm not singling you out. I'm sure a lot of us are using EC2, but you can actually, use EC2 plugins. You can use VMware plugins, anything else where you want like Test Kitchen to spin up your test resources, for you. It includes support for many testing frameworks, so you can actually do a plethora of these different testing frameworks, whatever suits your fancy. And of course, it's included with the Chef DK. Heard that before. So let's just think about this for a second. Now, if we're going to do test-driven development, the idea behind this is that we're going to create a series of tests, that's going to define what passing means to us. I kind of make it a kind of shooting pool where you're going to call your shot and then make sure that you actually shoot it. So what we do is we create a bunch of these tests, and then we go and basically first we fail because we haven't done any code yet, but then we do the minimum amount of code to make everything pass. And that's kind of the basic underlying concept of test-driven development. So if we had the need to actually support multiple operating systems, for instance, let's just say we had two, and we had our Apache default recipe. Doing two, maybe that's not the biggest pain. You go test something once, and then you go spin up another one, test it again. It's conceivable, right? Some people are willing to do that. I'm not, but some people are. But what if, you basically had two recipes that you had to count for? Well, now you got to do it 4 times, What if you throw another operating system in the mix? Now you're having to do this 6 times. Your day is toast. So we have Test Kitchen for this. So we have this kitchen.yaml file. And this is basically what it looks like right out of the gate. If you just do a Chef Generate cookbook, you get this file in this state, where you defaults to Vagrant using Chef Zero and uses these 2 flavors of Ubuntu and CentOS. Keep in mind, if you install Vagrant with VirtualBox, with the Chef DK, just put those 3 things on your system, you're pretty much ready to test. I mean, you've done a pretty good job of making that happen. But with this said, let's break down what each of these things are in case you want to modify them. So the first thing is the driver. Kind of mentioned before, the default's Vagrant, and there's lots of drivers for lots of different virtualization platforms and cloud providers. You have this provisioner. Now, the default is to use Chef Zero. Like we said, Chef Zero is Chef in local mode. You're almost always going to want to keep it this way because the alternative is you can use it a full-blown Chef server. But the whole point of testing is to kind of make sure that you test it before you actually put it up on that Chef server. So most of the time, that's kind of counterproductive, and you're just going to find yourself wanting to use Chef Zero. But to be flexible, we allow you to do that. And then you have your platforms. These are kind of self-explanatory. These are going to represent the flavors of the OS that you want to test against. And then finally, we have your suites. And this is the policy that you've written and what's going to get tested. So the default suite that gets tested is the default recipe. So in this case, Apache default. And when you first create a cookbook, like in the case when we created Apache, it comes with a default recipe. So this is ready to test that recipe that was already generated. But you could add more if you wanted to. So again, the way this looks like when you start adjusting that matrix to the way this kitchen.yaml file looks like, if you add a recipe, you can see you're just going to be adding a new recipe down there. If you add another operating system, you can see you just added in your platforms. And so in this one file, you can control a huge, huge matrix without making a lot of crazy amounts of configuration change in your YAML file. So again, configuration file for test kitchen, you have drivers, provisioners, platforms, and suites. So let's go back to my thing and let's actually do some test kitchen.
Yay.
So the first thing we see here is this kitchen create. So before I go do that, I want to modify this a little bit because I don't want to create all this stuff right now because we got a time constraint. So one thing I do know, and I will mention this, is there is a little bug now where I have to put this chef in because the default CentOS 6.5 is for some reason not connecting. Someone's not maintaining it. So we have this chef /6.5. The other thing that I'm going to do, and only for display, is I got some snippets here. Is I'm going to put this port forwarder on here. That's going to allow us, when we start spinning up web content, to see it on a local browser. I normally wouldn't even be doing this, but it makes for good display. So, like I said, normally I'm just going to rely on my tests, but this way I can actually show you, so you know that's not smoke and mirrors, that this is actually going to be a web server that we're building. That's pretty much it. I don't really need to modify it beyond that. So with this done, actually, let me do, I will do one thing. I'm going to turn this to a 9. I think I might have that tied up. So with this done, I'm going to go into the Apache cookbook. And let's just do a kitchen create, like we see here. You know what I just realized? Do I have internet?
Yeah. The wireless, there's wireless, the password's right on the
Seems like
wall.
I guess I'll find out if I don't. It seems to show that I do. I'm trying to figure
Maybe
out.
you were here before, weren't
That's
you?
probably what it was.
Thanks for not changing the password. QConnect.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I was just on GitHub, so obviously I realized when you thinking of it, like you've covered everything.
Like, oh, shit.
Like basic internet. I didn't test that. Okay. So you can see this is basically spinning up a CentOS 6.5 instance. So it's done. Now you notice I just said create. So going back to our deck here, all we've really done is created that CentOS image. We haven't done any like Chef client or anything like that yet. But if I move forward here, you can see that we can do this command kitchen login, and we can actually log into our instance if we so desire. So let's just do that. And you can see we're in there. There's not much going on. It's a very stripped down CentOS box at the moment, but we'll change that. So the next thing we're going to want to do, oops, wrong direction, there we go, is we're going to want to do what's called a kitchen converge. And so what the kitchen converge is going to do is it's going to install the Chef client, it's going to upload the cookbook or the policy that we've created, and then apply it to the run list. So it's basically going to make the stuff that we run, or that we create, our policy, run against this test node. So why don't we go ahead and do that? So you'll see what it's going to do is it's resolving the dependencies using that tool Bookshelf. So a lot of cookbooks will depend on other cookbooks. So Bookshelf takes care of all of that dependency management for you. And now it's going through and installing the Chef client. Sometimes, I've noticed, we'll give this a chance. Sometimes I have to, I don't know, for some reason it has a hiccup, and then I have to run it again, and it's fine. The cool thing about it is, it goes back to that item potency thing, that you can just run this thing over and over again. It's just going to catch up right where it left off. So I'm going to give this all of about 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to cancel it and run it again.
Got a crappy mirror or something?
Yeah. It's no big deal. And it's strange, I have walked through this a few times, and so I've kind of found a consistency that it'll now pick up. Yeah, so this is in VirtualBox, and it's really being driven by Vagrant.
You download everything else, but
yeah.
that it takes a while to download. I think you just got one slow mirror.
It, I don't know, when I was walking through this, it just waits just long enough to get me to start sweating. And then I don't know why.
It looks kind of typical to me. That's what it usually takes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is Vagrant run within Chef? Is Vagrant outside?
Vagrant's technically outside of Chef, but you have the test kitchen that's driving Vagrant. Yeah, so, all right, bastard.
It's a sneaky.
Are you seeing, I mean, Chef DK is fairly much a client-side development kit. Are you seeing a lot of sort of Jenkins pipelines, people doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So with Jenkins, has a good place in the whole pipeline. There we go. I thought it picked up that. So typically when we're doing all this local development, and that's what the Chef DK is about, you're going to kind of do this locally. Well, you're going to basically put it up to your GitHub repo or your Git repo or your version control for that matter. A lot of times what most people are doing at this point is they're putting some kind of CI server between, between their repo and the Chef server to do additional tests, that they have to do. And because a lot of this stuff like Test Kitchen can be run off Jenkins, can be run off your CI tool. And that's a very common pattern that we find because it really assures that everything going in is clean. In fact, a lot of people will even control, like the only Jenkins user is the only thing allowed to upload to the Chef server, just to kind of make sure that everything has a pure path. So what's going on
So if you
here?
want to do that instead, are people typically just doing that from the shell command in Jenkins, or is there a Jenkins plugin?
Well, it's a Jenkins job, and yeah, through a shell command. Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, you can run like the same commands I'm doing here. Even if you install the Chef DK on the Jenkins server, it now has all the same power to do this. So you can do things like a kitchen fast or kitchen converge, etc.
So if I'm in an Amazon environment and I have a Jenkins server there, what would we have it spin up with a EC2 instance to run the test?
Sure. Yeah, like I said, you just need to replace the Vagrant driver with the EC2 driver.
Would there be a smarter, faster solution than using EC2?
The funny thing is with, and I'm going to cancel this one last time. Let's see.
Because VirtualBox spins up a whole lot faster than an EC2 instance.
Yes, but the real slick thing that we're finding is running Docker containers inside EC2 instances with the kitchen Docker driver. And we do this for a class, and the way we discovered it is we were doing class over the AWS Loft, and you cannot run VirtualBox in an EC2 instance. It's just bad virtualization mojo, right? So we had to come up with an alternative, so we installed Docker containers in there, and these things spin up Docker containers as fast as you're doing your unit test.
Right.
So it's a very, very fast, slick method.
How painful was that integration with Docker?
It's easy. Yeah. In fact, if this fails, what I will do is I'll spin up one of those instances if I have to, and we'll turn it into a Chef provisioning talk. I'm willing to,
I want to check what it's trying to W get. Maybe it's something not that important. We just dump it in the host files to get it to fail fast.
Here, while this is going, I'll give you kind of
Silly question, but you get more output of those commands so that you get a better feel?
Yeah, I could have done it verbose, so maybe I'll do that. I think it's
Is that what it's trying to grab right there? It's trying to grab something at just.
Yeah.
Log level, yeah, so it's,
That should fail really quickly.
I can set the log level here.
Is it possible it's finding like a 404 and it just tries over and over again?
Yeah, that's what, like I said, it's just, it usually makes me sweat a little bit, but. Because we're trying at home.
Yeah, I was gonna try that you were on the browser, see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give it a trust everybody.
Should I try what you get with that URL?
Yeah, that's what he's doing.
Well, actually, the last one.
Yeah, do the
Sorry, I'm
RPM.
on the wrong one. aren't I?
No,
They're down again.
One more down? Oh,
It
you're
might
right.
be the same thing, but there you go.
There you go. So it's trying to.
And if it's a problem with the S3, Kevin will jump in.
Maybe you got a bad DNS.
Oops. Oh, Debbie,
Yeah, there you go.
Oops. Oh, I'm on. Let me do this. Yeah, I was just about to curl it.
No, dash O and no.
Oh, just, yeah, you're right.
Control A will take it to
Oops, sorry.
Oh, good.
Control A,
Control
yeah, I
A,
know.
yeah. It's
Not
that command.
Oh, yeah.
Control
I'm a newly introduced to Mac guy. So, no, I know, but like with my command. Yeah, so what am I trying to do? Is
Try dash O space X, just to have it make a file.
Oh, I gotcha.
There you go.
Yeah, so that's not the
Oh, it's
problem.
transferring.
The vacant box has an issue.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it could actually, it says 8 minutes left, so that's,
Oh.
so we're just having a slow
It's just
connection.
big, and yeah.
Yeah.
No, I tried. doing
I'm
something
pretty
just
fast
slow.
at home, so I'll stop that just to
Blame
not add
Q.
more traffic.
Let me cut the live stream and we'll go a lot faster.
So I'll tell you what,
Just do a presentation.
yeah, it's, I mean, I think it's what, like you said, it's actually downloading.
So just talk for another 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, essentially what I'll bring up is we have this thing called server spec. And what server spec is our testing, framework. It's one of many, but it's probably the most widely used because it does a really good job of making tests for infrastructure. It works especially well with Chef because they tend to have like a one-to-one mapping between their resources and ours and the way you describe them.
But server spec is an independent project.
Complete independent project, though it comes with the Chef DK.
Right.
And we are willing to support it, as far as our enterprise customers who use the Chef DK are concerned. And so just to give you an example, going back to my snippets of what some of these server tests look like. So they kind of fall into this format of like describe, package, it should be installed. Describe service, it should be running. Describe port, it should be listening. It's pretty much English if you break it down.
But yet per distribution, it knows how to verify, use the appropriate tools for that distribution.
Yeah, and that's a good point with
Figure out
Chef
the
as well,
package.
because notice when we say package Apache, it didn't sit there and say, well, should I do this with Yum? Should I do this,
Yeah.
with raw?
And it's the
smart enough.
package called Apache 2.86,
Yeah.
right? All that.
So it has what we call kind of same defaults that it kind of uses to make sense of that.
I'm not sure I understand why you would have tests for something like this. Is it because once you have abstractions for your packages that include packages, you end up not being certain if it's actually going to end up installing Apache in the end? So we better check that it actually did. Because you're declaring like install Apache, and then you're saying let's do a test where we say did it install Apache?
There's a little bit of like, we're putting this together fast and furious to show kind of functionality, where this may not be the most practical example, but if you start doing complicated infrastructure in Chef, like most people end up doing, that's when you want to have this kind of testing framework, because there'll be other things like, you're right, just installing a package in Apache, I'm going to know that worked pretty quick.
You have to trust it's working, that's the whole point of the tool.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why we're spinning up a environment.
Well, since though with the TDD methodology, the test-driven development, and you said, what was it, test-driven infrastructure? I assume there's also, you're assuming that you're going to have very granular, very simple tests, and they should always succeed, right? Yeah. That's just the philosophy of a test-driven approach.
It seems a little redundant.
Well, the thing though is if there's
a server matrix of this, and you had a bunch of, yeah, but Ubuntu didn't call it that, and I forgot to put a case statement in there, so that I installed HTTPD instead of Apache or whatever.
Yeah, and that's a good.
You have to end up, if you want to generalize one that works across platforms, you definitely want to just go and make sure that the.
Right, because
in reality, the chef client, though he does say it fixes or installs, it doesn't. So most of the time, I have to run chef client twice in order to get a clean install. And if through automation it's running once, having a test at the end that is independent of chef is valuable.
But also, I mean, so one area that this is useful for me is, let's say we're working on a recipe and Apache is supposed to listen on port 8080, for example, and someone went and updated an attribute file and changed the port, right? And then the test will fail. If I didn't have the test, the entire run will be clean. I'll get no errors, but I won't see my web server in 8080. So
yeah, and
that's a good argument.
Yeah, and there's things like when you get into security compliance, that you want to basically prove, if you have a rule that says like, I can't have port 21 open on this thing, and you want to have a security officer prove it, they can take control of that within the chef environment and prove that everything going in there is at least being looked at. And we have a tool analytics that does that really well. It uses, there we go. I'm not.
Yay!
Warning.
Yeah. So, but that's all right because it downloaded it.
Why did it fail?
At least it went downloaded.
Yeah, it downloaded it, so I have a feeling we'll be okay here. Yep, we're fine.
Yay!
So why does that happen? Because that does happen a lot.
Yeah.
Let's read that error message.
Why do we have to run everything twice?
Yeah, no problem. No, I'm all for it. I didn't need to. I wasn't trying to be sleight of hand with you. I just wanted to make sure that it was working before I.
Yeah, so just skipping the Ruby meetings time, it's like we here.
Yeah, it looks like it looks. I agree. I think it looks like a timeout, but if we go up here. Yeah, it's not, I mean, we can go into the logs and stuff like that. They're all available.
I think you just said -L in the.
Yeah.
An argument. So
Yeah, and maybe that's what it didn't like. And again, if I go into the kitchen, there's the logs, they're all right here. We can see all the fun stuff.
Okay. So actually, that brings up a good question. Does Chef Generate know to ignore the logs?
Yes.
There you go. Cool.
Ooh,
Yeah. Normally, you're going to have the .chef directory, where you're going to have mainly your keys and your configuration data, and it does a good job by default of making sure that's ignored. I don't know if the logs might not. I don't see them here.
There's another git ignore in the Apache code.
Oh, there you go.
Kitchen, it's ignoring.
Yeah, and that's where the logs are.
Okay, cool.
So there you go. Yeah. Great question. I didn't know
Awesome.
the answer. How to explore it. So, okay, so now we can actually move on. So what we've done here, if I go back to the snippets, is I'm going to actually copy these, and I'm moving a little fast just because we kind of time sucked. But really quick, server spec. What server spec is going to do is it's going to look in this default location, which is test integration or test related files. Test Kitchen has this tool called a busser that's going to match a directory in the default file with the suite name. So when it sees these two things, it matches it and does all the tests beneath it. And so just to show you what that looks like, if we open up this test directory integration, we see we have a default server spec default here. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all this and place it with our tests. I would have done this more slick and methodically, but we'll just dump them all here.
And you can see, like in our kitchen.yaml, we have a named suite default, which is the default recipe that it's going to match here and look inside this directory. And we only have server spec, but we could have other testing suites. And they would go through and do all the different testing suites underneath that directory.
Cool.
So,
Actually, something occurs to me as well, and this might be possibly a better answer for why you're doing testing of this stuff is, so something I've run into is you'll run multiple cookbooks, and one will lay down a file, and then a subsequent cookbook will go and destroy that file, or overwrite the file, or do something else to the file. So you can, with that test, like it'll surface up.
It's still there in the end.
So
Yeah.
what I'm doing now is a kitchen verify. And what this is going to do is it's going to actually install the busser gem, which is that thing that's going to look for that default directory. And it's going to install all that server spec suite onto this test node. And then it's going to run the test, and we're going to get a failure. And this is what we call a good failure, because this is what we wanted. Keep in mind, we actually didn't create any recipe yet, right? So how could these things possibly pass, right? So what we can do now is let's just make them pass. So we have this recipe, here's our default recipe. Here's where I show off about how cool the Chef plugin is. I want a package.
Ooh, ah.
We'll make that, so we know what that does, right? Let's make a file. How's that?
Wow.
Are there package aliases to make it easier, like what Puppet does, or is there?
I'm not sure what the is.
Well, like you can just say this is HTTP, but it's really actually to this platform. Or do you actually have to have if things problems?
You know, the one cool thing I would say, yeah, I mean, I don't know of anything like that, but someone could write it. I mean, that's the beautiful thing. I mean, Chef has a DSL based on Ruby, but it can also just use Ruby. It's not restricted to just the DSL. And that's why the community can build a lot of that functionality into it. So
I think that the Chef would be to make that the attribute that would be derived from the OS.
Yeah, no, that would actually make sense too. So let me just do this real quick. So I'll just create a service.
Cool.
So here's our 3 resource recipe that's going to build our web server. Oh, one thing I need to do is let's get some content. Hello, I am simple, but I work. How's that?
Better than hello world.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. Whoops, I even misspell. No, that's all right. Okay. So I save this. Now here's the thing, and this is where people get kind of crisscrossed. If I hit verify, do you think this is going to pass? No.
No, because you have to converge first.
Brilliant.
So Converge runs the Chef recipes?
Correct. Yeah,
Cool.
so it's going to now take my updated stuff that I changed that recipe and apply it. So you see we're converging those 3 resources.
Those are.
Yeah, I just forgot about we did have a long. It's probably not as bad as the Chef client, but it should be faster.
Why is it complaining about
There
the
we
same
go.
file with the same directory?
What's that?
It said it found the file in the same directory, so the same directory. So right there. This is
The DNA
Oh, okay.
Is one a symlink to the other?
Yeah, something I'll look into. But
There's no red in there.
yeah, that's positive. And I can tell you this, if we go here and we just do a local host, do 9080. You know, we have a web page.
Wow.
That's working. That's why I did that port forwarder. Like,
Right.
again, I trust my test normally, but this gives you even more proof. And let's do our kitchen verify. Now, again, we've already installed the busser now, so this should go really fast. You know, and that's the thing. There's a little bit of upfront wait, but once you have it running, it's pretty fast. And you can see we're passing all the things that we wanted, so we're pretty awesome. There's one thing that still bugs me a little bit though about this is that when we work on cookbooks, we have this concept of that we really press about abstracting our data from our policy. See, right now, if someone wanted to change this content, they're gonna have to literally go into this recipe and work on it directly. And it'd be much better if we were sourcing this content from like an outside file. So we have another snippet that I'm just gonna pull up for time's sake. And you can see it's a little more involved.
Oh, the template.
Yes. So here's the deal with templates versus files. I never use files. There's no reason to ever use a file. The only time I use a file is right now for meetups and training. Because a template can do everything a file can, and it's future-proof. If you need to put dynamic content in there, you can do that.
Does this really handle binary data for all the templates?
Yes. You mean, yeah, and I think, let me know if this doesn't answer your question. And we'll,
Oh, is the binary, there'd be no point of using a template.
yeah,
So then a file would make sense.
yeah. Okay. Well, you got a lot of different resources. So the file, usually there's something that overlaps a file. So if you're talking about like a remote file, for a binary, you have like a remote file. A template can do everything a file can. I mean, there's, even if you don't put dynamic data in it.
What if it's binary and it looks like ERP? So.
Yeah, sometimes you don't want it interpreted as a Ruby.
Okay, no, that's fair.
Script. You want it to treat it as a binary, not worry that, yeah, if Ruby code's going to be.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying, a cookbook file would be more appropriate in that case, because then you don't have it in line. The file's in line.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to say that templates replace everything, but for most of the average stuff you're doing, a template would definitely. So let's just look at this really quick. It's obviously making the same file in the same place, but it's actually sourcing it now from this index HTML ARB file. We've added some dynamic content. Now, you remember I was talking about before about OHIDE and collecting that dynamic data. And I said that this is kind of the format that you use, which is like call out the node and then you go how deep you need to go based on where the data that you're looking for. So in this case, we're putting some dynamic data into it. Now, of course, the problem here is we don't actually have a template anywhere into our cookbook, so we need to generate one. So why don't we do that? So I'm in the cookbook right now, so I'll just do a chef, generate, template. And I'm going to actually put this dot here to say that, put it in the cookbook that I'm in. And I'm going to name it index.html. You notice I'm not putting the ARB, it's going to handle that for me. And then finally, I'm going to do this little trick here where I'm going to do a -s for source. And I actually happen to have a index.html file already. And this is handy if you have a really long, complicated config file that you want to put dynamic places into. You can pull that file down on your local file system, use it as a source. You don't have to like worry about cutting and pasting or typing it.
Right, and then your chef generate templates kind of just slurp it all in.
Yep. And so we just do that. And now, lo and behold, we have a templates directory in our default, and here's our index.html. You can admire all my mad HTML skills all you want. That's all right. But you can see here.
Hey, if you want to see awesome HTML, go to the UUASC.org site.
But you can see we're using some variables here that we're putting into this ERB file. So we can now put in dynamic content, right? And you'll also see that if we go back to this default, that there's kind of this one-to-one mapping. We have this platform version running on local IP, and it's just pulling that OHIDE data in. So now that this is here, why don't we do a converge? So again, we're not replacing the file, but we are replacing the content. So you can see that we did modify one resource, 1 out of 4. And now if we go to here and refresh this, you can see now we have all this dynamic data available to us. This is where the magic kind of secret sauce with Chef comes in. When you start thinking about that scenario we're talking about where you have all this topography that you have to account for, that's going to be constantly moving. Like a classic case we talk about is like
a load balancer. You know, it has a bunch of web servers under it, and you're kind of doing like auto scaling actions all the time. And so you're adding and removing these web servers. If you have the actual config file, that load balancer, working off a Chef template that's doing a search, and every 5 minutes searching the Chef server for just a list of all the, you know, nodes that have the role web server on them, that list will, every 15 minutes will be up to date, and you'll have all those nodes kind of moving with the topography real time, and you don't have, you can just eat a donut. It's pretty cool. Or something healthy.
So are you saying OHI is collecting the data, like the local IP address, back to the server?
Correct. OHI, whenever it does a Chef client run, it collects all that, it keeps all that data updated. It collects a new take of all that data. In this case, it's on the virtual machine we're running, but it still collects all that data and then gives it back. So, with that said, I kind of already went through this. So this is kind of the.
You got 10 minutes.
Oh, dude, I'm so good. I'm closing up. I'm finishing hard, fast here. So we got our Chef workflow. So we create a skeleton cookbook. We saw how to do that with our Chef Generate. We create a VM environment for our cookbook development. You know, we saw what Kitchen does that for us using Vagrant and VBox. We write cookbook recipes, you know, iterative steps, and we do our performance and tests to make sure and verify and bring all that confidence. Once all that's done, we're feeling pretty good. We start moving it into production. Like was mentioned earlier, most cases, moving to production means that we're moving it up to our version control, you know, or Git or whatever, and having some kind of CI tool that probably takes over from there in most real life scenarios. But there are people who are like, okay, I tested it. I'm going to manually upload it to the Chef server through some like dive commands as well. I mean, that does happen, but I definitely, why not? You have this test suite, why not put it up on a kind of a CI tool and let it really be automated? You know, then you're really cooking. Any questions at this point? So I do have some further resources for you guys. So I was just going to give you, first off, provide you some resources that you can read. This is the link to this deck. I put it in a little bit link if anyone wants to take it down. I agree with you. I'll fill this in on the site afterwards for the meetup.
Cool. Thank you.
So don't worry about it if you can't jot it down this fast. We'll just fill it in later. Go to docs.chef.io. The team that maintains that are like my heroes. They're like, I don't know how many updates they're doing a day, but they're just constantly keeping that thing up to date. And it's a really good source to just understand what resources are at your disposal. It's pretty cool. There's books, there's the Learning Chef. This is still a solid book, even with all the changes with Chef for just getting the fundamentals. It still works really well. This book is awesome. Once you get to a point where you're done with the fundamentals, you want to start learning about creating your own resources, like your own LWRPs, creating your own OHI plugins. I mean, there's just an infinite amount of customization you can do in Chef. This book does a really good job of walking you through it. LearnChef.com is an awesome site for just tons of actual tutorials. And every platform, I think, well, not every platform, it's pretty much Red Hat, Ubuntu, and Windows, but it covers Ubuntu and Red Hat for those two religious wars. We appease both sides. So that's stuff you could read. As far as stuff you can watch, we have a YouTube channel. You know, we have the Chef Conf talks on there. We have a lot of training videos. There's the foodfightshow.org. Is anyone familiar with that? A guy by named Nathan Harvey is our community director. He hosts that. He works for Chef, but it's not all about Chef. I mean, he tries to leave it pretty open for all kinds of DevOps topics. So then we have the Ship Show, which is another podcast. This is where we're getting into the audio podcasts. The Food Fight Show also has an audio feed, so I guess we put it up here twice. And then as far as things like the IRC, definitely encourage you to go. That's a great place to learn a lot about what's going on with Chef. Maybe even chime in if you have some thoughts. Chef Community Summit. My first day at Chef was at the Chef Community Summit, and it was an eye-opening thing. I came in here and realized, like, I am not the smartest person in this room by far.
It's an awesome place where it's just all community driven. We're not selling anything. It's just about making Chef better and getting together with a lot of people to do it. Chef Conf is coming up. It's going to be in Austin this next coming year. So that should be fun. If you guys have worked for companies that are willing to fly you there, it's a blast.
6th Street.
Yeah.
Yay.
And that is it. I made it under the 10 minutes. This is kind of the time where I'd be doing a lot of Q&A and discussion, but we can do it over beer.
Yeah, well, I had a question for you, Chef. So how did you get involved with Chef, and then how did you get involved working for Chef?
Well, there's one person who I used to work with before I worked at Chef. Brian can tell you. So I worked over at a joint venture between Warner Brothers and Deluxe called Javelin. Brian still is my hero. Still making it rain there. And so I was working there, and we were, well, before Brian got there, like it was just me. And when I first was doing the interview, I walked into this place, and it's on a data center, probably, what would you say, about the size of this room? Maybe a little bigger. And I looked at it and just seeing blinking lights everywhere. I'm like, wow, you guys must have an amazing private cloud here. And they're like, private what? And I'm like, virtualization? Like, no, we don't do virtualization. And I realized at that point that all these servers were like handmade, which was just like, oh my God. So at that point, you have a decision to make.
Update your resume.
Yeah, you can either like go, I'm out of here, or you could do what I did, is like, I could help them. This, I can change them. And, I learned this like lesson about what it takes to change culture. It took a long, long, long time. And I checked on Brian, and now they're kicking ass. And what ended up happening as we started, first moving towards things like virtualization, consolidation, eventually into AWS, and starting to expand our space, I literally got a call from Chef, and they were like the one place that I was willing to leave, because I was actually really happy where I was at. I mean, we
conquered it.
Well, we were just getting warmed up, and Brian's done a really good job of kind of taking that flag and running where I left off. But yeah, I was getting into it. I was starting to enjoy it. But Chef was like the one place that I just couldn't pass up. And say this like there's this kind of concept where people are always like, oh, you drink the Kool-Aid and all this stuff. And I will say one thing about Chef. I don't love Chef because I work for Chef. I work for Chef because I love Chef. It's really true. And I was starting to figure that out at Warner Brothers and going through that kind of experience. And it's just now I get to play with it all the time. So.
And so you got into it from the configuration management standpoint, not from the Ruby or...
Yeah, I was definitely an ops guy. I was leaning on Brian for a lot of the coding stuff. And now, because of what I do, I'm becoming a lot more code-centric. Question back there, sorry.
Can you make that recipe log to the terminal what the value of one of those variables is?
Wait, sorry, say that one more time?
So in your recipe,
can
you make it put out to the output, the value of one of the variables that's in your template?
Can I put the output?
So can you echo what Chef Server thinks that the value?
Oh!
I want a print statement in the middle of that block.
Okay.
There's a log function, right?
Yeah, for sure.
How come you didn't plug Marketplace?
What's that?
How come you didn't plug Marketplace?
Dude, that's the problem with Chef, is it's just too expensive. Yes, there's a wonderful place called Marketplace where we keep all of our community cookbooks. It's actually, the funny thing, a lot of people don't know this about Marketplace, is it's actually an open source project in and of itself. So there's a lot of organizations, a lot of enterprise organizations that are building their own private marketplaces off that code, which is nice because it integrates with our dependency managers, things like Brookshelf and so on. So yeah, that was a good call.
Is there a book that gets into the Chef development kit specifically, like working within the Chef development, and how kind of new is that as a package?
Huh?
What did Chef does?
Yeah.
Okay. So all the books cover it.
I mean, the Chef development kit has officially been out for about a year.
Okay.
It's changed a lot.
But it's changed a lot. It's a real moving target. So I think I believe it's mentioned in things, but I to really do a thorough thing, I think it's going to eventually get to this point where it starts, all the changes and expanding and stuff is going to start slowing down a little bit, so it just becomes a solid thing. And I think we're starting to get there.
So it's probably maybe there's the videos first and the books will.
Yeah, if
come
you
later.
learnchef.io, what he was talking about, that's a tutorial
Oh, the
stuff, so we can
website.
keep up with the Chef DK on that, because we can constantly update it. But like printed material, it's really hard. I mean, it's hard to do chef in printed material anyway, because it is such a fast-moving target with a crazy, robust community that's always constantly, adjusting and modifying it and making it better.
Hands-on, always working
Yeah.
at it,
Yeah.
making errors,
Yeah.
finding out what's going on.
Yeah, it's the best way to learn. The best way to learn chef is to do chef.
So Ned, Jordan's probably taking out for this one, but Windows.
Yes.
What was the difference between the Windows and the Linux stuff?
So I wasn't prepared to field that question at this meetup, but I can field it. I'm happy to. So Windows, we've made a lot of strides trying to make Windows as much of a first-class citizen as we can. Now, in reality, Windows is fundamentally different from Linux. I mean, let's face it, Linux and Unix is easy. There are files. I mean, you can manipulate files all day long. With Windows, you have this API. So Jeffrey Snover came up with an amazing tool called the DSL, or not DSL, what am I saying, the DSC. And it's a basically desired state config that runs on top of PowerShell. And we really worked with him in tight coupling and created kind of a one-to-one mapping from most of our resources to those DSC resources. So we're having a lot of success now with Windows and Chef because of that.
So it's got to be a PowerShell enabled.
It doesn't have to be. It just makes things even cooler and makes things a little more level playing field when you start comparing Linux, the things you could do in Linux with Windows. The DSC really evens that playing field.
Yeah, I was at Scale, or hanging out at Scale in the pub with some of the chef folk. And one of the guys that was looking was really impressed with how he could use Bridge Chef to the DSE thing. So yeah, it's I guess there's some interesting stuff to come out of there. So hey, Ned, thank you very much. It's a very awesome presentation. We'll be back here, most likely here next month. I haven't figured out a speaker yet, so if you're interested, talk to me. And also keep an eye on the meetup.com site. And also, once again, thank you to Q and Carolyn at Q specifically for hosting us. And we're going to retreat over to the, what was the restaurant we go over? Islands. We're going to head over to Islands, so you're welcome to join us there for continued discussion on whatever. Thank you.
Sure. I got you.